Okay, it gave me a countdown, but I'm
Discord.
doing like an
Windows
actual
not.
I'm doing like an actual video recording here. So can you still see me in Discord?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Like it froze before the countdown, but now after the countdown, it's playing fine.
Well, let's get those out of my face, I guess. Yeah. So we've just finished emptying out the barrel and refilling it with Scarabus single malt, which I reviewed yesterday, but I'll give another taste today on video, I guess, because we're doing that now. So what went into the barrel was this lovely Clear Creek Pear Brandy, eau de vie, pear eau de vie, I guess I would call it. They wrote brandy on the label. I'm not sure how American spirits laws work on brandy, but I guess you can call it brandy even if it hasn't been in a barrel. So what came out was this, I had rye in the barrel previously, so this is a rye finished Clear Creek Pear Brandy. Has been in the barrel for 155 days. 2 liters went in. I would estimate about 1.2 liters came out, so that's a pretty significant angel share. That is the longest I've left a spirit in the barrel so far, so maybe that's not surprising. Let's see if we can get the pear brandy in the shot without blocking my face. So there's the Clear Pear Brandy. Now what I recall about this is that it very much tastes like pear distilled spirit. I'm used to tasting oak because I'm mostly a whiskey reviewer, so let's see if 5 months more experience has me get anything more complex out of the pear brandy. So I will say, even though I'm getting almost entirely pear from this, it is an extremely clean, crisp spirit. In a way, if you know what you're getting, in a way, the fact that it is just so unapologetically pear brandy, and it is just this clean, refreshing, like really clearly a high quality spirit, that may be worth paying for. I've only had this neat a couple of times. I've had it in a cocktail. It makes an excellent cocktail. Bartender pulled it out of the freezer, made up a cocktail. I don't remember what went into it, but it was a very nice, like frozen pear kind of slushy cocktail. It was really refreshing.
Sounds a bit like me with the cocktail, to be honest. I don't know what goes into it. It's refreshing. I'll enjoy it.
Sometimes that's what you want. And I mean, the majority of spirits sales and consumption is in the form of a cocktail. So your spirit's got to work that way.
Yeah, I don't know that in the slightest. Yeah. Like the times I've had a cocktail, I've not ordered it myself. It's been a case of like, just get me whatever. And someone comes back with a cocktail and I'm like, that's refreshing.
So what's interesting is that this is so that sort of refreshing, like a cool, like I guess pear juice. Not that I've really had pear juice that often, but like imagine like apple juice, but it's pear and it's just come out of the refrigerator. So like this nice cold crisp pear juice. Normally, when something has this kind of crispness, I would expect that it has some sort of a minty kind of flavor to it, but I wouldn't say that I'm getting that particularly. If my nose is not deceiving me, there is a little bit of an apple juice kind of aroma to it. I think more recent experience with unaged rums and unaged agave spirits has given me a little bit more of an appreciation for the flavor profiles of spirits that haven't sat in a barrel. So I don't know that I could do flavor notes for it. One thing is that my brandy reviewing is kind of weak, but I feel like I like this better than my first approach to it 5 months ago. For one thing, I appreciate just how clean it is. Yeah. Okay, so on the palate, it's more than it appears to be on the nose for the first thing. My expectation was that it would be really sweet because it just smells like that bright, crisp, fresh pear. But it's actually quite a bit drier on the palate than I was expecting. So it's definitely the pear. I would say it's the whole pear. It has the sort of minerality that the skin has. It has a bit of a texture of like that sort of grainy texture that a ripe pear has in the skin and the flesh, to a certain extent. It's a little bit astringent, but not in like a super drying way. It's more of like it just feels like a full-bodied fruit. This isn't just a liquor that was distilled from pears. This is a liquor that was trying to be the entire pear and has succeeded. Yeah, there's a little tiny bit of like fermented funkiness that feels familiar from kind of like an agricole rum, but like turned way down. And I guess it's just like this sort of just this estery kind of like clearly there was yeast at work. Like I'm not quite getting any other fruit besides pear and apple. I think the apple's coming from a kind of acidity. There's a little bit of a dry tannic thing. It has a little bit of bitterness. I think that's sort of leading into that. That together with the minerality is making me say pear skin. Yeah. Something on the late finish is like this just kind of aromatic, kind of like a dessert, like a sauce that you put on a dessert that's like a little bit floral, maybe like a poached pears in like a white wine sauce kind of thing going on in the finish. So yeah, success. I think on developing my palate, I've probably gotten a lot better at approaching a clear spirit. Before, I was sort of like, yep, that tastes like pears. And I would say the same things about like, that's a nice, crisp, clean spirit. But I wouldn't have said, I believe even back then I said it sort of tastes like the whole pear. But I don't think I would have been able to take apart even a few flavor notes that really makes me feel that way. And so I think in terms of a palate development thing, I would call that a success. So let's move on to the reason that I'm sitting here with the pear brandies tonight is moving on to this rye finished Clear Creek Pear Brandy I've had in the barrel now for 155 days, 5 months and 5 days if you assume a 30-day month. I had given this a taste a couple of times. I put it in early November and tasted it at Thanksgiving. And I actually took a sample of this to the distiller, or one of the distillers at Clear Creek, and let him have a taste because I had this idea, thanks to a lot of the online communities, when I was trying to figure out what do I do with a barrel that has had rye in it for, 135 days. So like a well-soaked barrel that's had rye. I assume anything that I put in the barrel after that is going to just take on a lot of those rye characteristics. So what can I put in the barrel that is going to be accentuated by the rye, where the rye isn't going to dominate or destroy the spirit that I put into the barrel? And I figured There's a lot of things where that would probably be a clash or too much flavor or something like that. So I kind of narrowed it down to a few things. I said I'd like to put Isla in there at some point, but I don't think a rye finish on an Isla is going to be a good look for the Isla. So I said, okay, a brandy maybe, but I feel like a grape brandy would be a bit of a clash, or a little bit too spicy, especially if it was an aged grape brandy that already has those woody notes to it. An apple brandy would probably work, but I didn't really like the idea of the flavor profile that would come out of that. And I was also thinking, what am I going to do as the next thing in the barrel after I was sort of trying to think 2 steps ahead. So we've got a rye soaked barrel. I need to do something with that rye seasoning. I expect that rye seasoning will sort of live on in all the spirits I put in the barrel after this too, to a certain extent. It's kind of just a powerful herbal flavor from that Bulleit rye. So we put something in there that's going to take the flavor of the rye and give its flavor to the barrel so that that flavor can go into the next thing. So I'm thinking, okay, I want to put an Isla in there eventually. What flavor is going to work well with an Isla? So I figured if I'm targeting a very dry ex-bourbon cask Isla, which I think is what I have here. There's not a whole lot of details about the Scarabus, but it does taste young. It tastes like probably an ex-bourbon cask. So it's pretty, it's got that peaty, smoky, a little bit of tropical fruits, but not in the direction of pear. So I figure we're going to add a little bit of extra oak, a little bit of pear flavor to that. I think that's going to work really well. Meanwhile, I'm thinking this thing that I put in the barrel's got to take a rye finish really well. And so I had thought maybe a rum. At that time, I was not really well versed on rum. So I bought a rum. I bought the Foursquare Probitas. I tried it. I felt like I did not appreciate it well enough. So I wouldn't really be able to say whether I'd like what would happen if I used it in the barrel. So that just sort of told me I need to learn rum better. So let's table that idea for a while. And then there was the pear brandy idea, just taking this pear flavor and adding all of these rye spicy flavors to it. And I think that actually would probably turn out very well. The other idea that I had was to do a mezcal. I really like the Hikaru Reposado. I figured I could get a Hikaru Joven, and because I'm going to be adding the barrel flavor to it anyway, I don't need to start with an already aged mezcal. So I tried taking the mezcal and adding a little bit of this pear brand, a little bit of the rye to it. So the mezcal plus the rye that was in the barrel already. See what they do when they get together. And what happened was wild. It tasted like nothing. It was just like a really smooth, basically water flavor. So I said, well, I don't have a whole lot of confidence that if I put those things together into a barrel, and when I say I was mixing it, was like, okay, just a little bit of the rye to the mezcal. We could try to mimic that ratio, like a couple of milliliters of the rye into a standard measure of the mezcal. And the rye just somehow canceled out everything that made the mezcal interesting. Didn't think it would turn out better in the barrel, so I scrapped that idea. So then I again went back to the drawing board and I said, what am I going to buy here? So I've tried this pear brandy before, and in my naivete, I would say, I felt like what I wanted from this brandy was more wood flavors. It's a bit of a sacrilege for people who like their unaged pear brandy or their eau de vie, unaged fruit brandies. That's kind of what I was looking for as a whiskey drinker. So I thought, if I'm going to add some age to the pear brandy, and I'm going to give it these rye spicy flavors, that might turn out really well. So I tried it at Thanksgiving, and I brought a sample to Joe at Clear Creek, and we tried it there, and the results were very encouraging. Not necessarily done yet, but the flavors that it had at that point in time were basically like a pear tart. Like it sort of added this pastry, bready sort of complexity that I think that it benefited from. And I figured, you know, we should leave it in the barrel for what I consider to be the full term, which is it started as 3 months and it got longer as I was using the barrel more because the barrel is less active. So I know kind of what to expect from this. I kind of expect that those bready flavors are turned up a bit more. I hope it didn't go too far. That's my hope right now. I hope that 155 days wasn't too long. I meant to take it out sooner because I thought that, you know, an unaged spirit getting the barrel finish could have been, you know, it's a much more delicate spirit. So I figured I wanted to apply the barrel delicately. Unfortunately, I had no idea what I would put in the barrel yet because I hadn't fully decided that I wanted to put Isla in the barrel yet. And also I was busy. So I basically just forgot about it, meant to take it out after 4 months. Here we are at 5 months. You know, it's a little bit longer. Hopefully the rye part of this barrel was less active in the later months. So anyway, with that incredibly long prelude, let's get into tasting it. Oh, that's very interesting. So I would say the Bulleit rye is unmistakable in the nose. It's that sort of herbal, grassy, woody, really sweet thing. And it's not too dissimilar. That nose in the Bulleit rye is not too dissimilar from the kind of the high notes, the shiny, like that sort of mentholic freshness sort of matches with the pear juice freshness that's in the unaged brandy. So maybe this was a good choice, maybe not. A little bit too samey. Yeah, going back and forth, I have to say I really like the aged version. It has a lot more complexity. There's kind of a powdered sugar sort of thing going on in the nose as well. Yeah. The rye did not overpower it. I was worried about that. I would say the rye is there in kind of like a little more than a support capacity, maybe like 30% of the flavor profile. A certain amount of the flavor I think is coming directly from this barrel. Yeah, so there's that grassiness, that sort of rye cherry. The pear is very still present. There's sort of a mentholic freshness on the nose, but not so much on the palate or the finish. That sort of aged brandy, powdered sugar, confectioner sugar thing is happening on the nose. The mouthfeel is a little thinner than I was expecting. It's about the same as the unaged pear brandy. I have no idea what proof came out of the barrel. I think the proof of the rye that was in the barrel before is going to be negligible in the aged effect. The pear brandy that went in was 40%. I don't know whether in my house the proof is going up or down, so all I can say is it's probably circa 40%. It still tastes like a spirit. And the reason I mention that is I think it's the ethanol burn is tamped down a little bit in the barrel aged version. There's not very much of the burn. but I think what little there was kind of on the back end on the finish is tamped down a bit. But instead, we have a sort of barrel tannic burn replacing that. But yeah, on the palate, very little burn, and the only kind of place there's a burn, so the pear brandy kind of burns down in here, a little bit of ethanol burn, but the aged pear brandy sort of burns just to the back of the throat as you swallow, which I associate with a bit of a tannic profile. Yeah, there's a little bit of a warm, cakey pastry kind of thing happening on the nose. I think overall, I may not be entirely too happy with the way the nose turned out because it's a lot less pear, a little bit too much of the rye. But I think the palate is really balanced. It's got the pear, it's got that sort of bready, cakey quality. It's got it's got all the rye notes, and it's got a little bit of something that feels like there's a little bit of an emergent sort of flavor quality that didn't quite come from either the brandy or the rye. Could be from the barrel, could just be from the integration of everything, but there's a sort of fruity bitterness. No particular fruit is really coming to mind on that, but I might say like underripe cherries. Yeah, like sort of like underripe black cherries, I think. Got a little bit of clove, a little bit of cinnamon. Kind of a short finish. Lingers just a little bit. Sort of comes out into this sort of wood bitter tannic flavor right at the end. Yeah. What's interesting, overall, I think I liked it better after a month. 35 days, I think, is when I pulled that sample for Joe. I think it was a little bit more well in balance there. I think the rye and the barrel haven't completely taken it over, but they're a little bit too strong. That the delicate pear flavors, the sort of pear freshness, the juiciness that like that sort of stewed pear flavor that I was getting in the aged version before isn't really there anymore. But all that said, I wouldn't say it's over oaked. It's just a little bit too much for what the base spirit was. I would say I quite enjoy both before and after the aging process. Going back and forth between them makes this one seem nicer than it seems to if I'm not thinking about the context of the unaged version. I think by itself, this is kind of, a rye-like, lightly aged brandy. I think without the context of where it started, you don't quite get the nuance of like what happened to it. So this is the sort of thing that wouldn't necessarily make a good standalone drink, or maybe it would. As always, I like to give blind samples of what came out of my barrels to a few people whose reviews that I like to read. So like with the past instances of aging things in the barrel, we'll find out what other people think about it, not necessarily knowing what it was. I kind of look forward to that. I think, I spoil myself a little bit in terms of giving an honest assessment of it, knowing that I made this to a certain extent, and what it is. So I'm looking for certain things, and I kind of wonder what people would think of it, not knowing anything about it. But overall, I'd say I'm pretty happy with that. So looking forward, I've just put this Scarabus Isla single malt, which I suspect is a young Kalila, ex-bourbon cask, into this barrel. It's a good price point. It's a pretty good single malt, even though I don't know its identity, and it was very cost effective. I wouldn't say cheap. Just because it is a low price doesn't mean that it's cheap in terms of thinking, not a good quality product. Yeah, that is. So this that I'm nosing right now is the Scarabus. That is a pretty nice nose on that. This has had a chance to open up for basically as long as I've been talking here, so about half an hour. So let me not cheat and pull up my review notes from before. It's got faint smokiness on the nose, like a fresh chopped, lightly maybe a pineapple that's been put in some sugar water maybe. So like not quite the most acidic pineapple. There's a sort of a citrus acidity and kind of a bitterness that I believe are called grapefruit, like a ruby red grapefruit juice. Again, sweetened. It's got a nice sweetness to it on the nose. The smoke is sort of obviously there, and then you sort of focus in on the fruits, and then you kind of come back to the smoke. There's kind of a mossiness to it. Like kind of, I wouldn't quite say like, there's an outdoorsy thing to it, like kind of being on the hills in the countryside on a spring day, which is kind of an interesting description to give about an Isla, which is usually more, coastal or more of like marshy or tar-like or something like that. So this is a very fresh kind of earthiness. And on the palate, the smoke is the first thing that becomes apparent. It's kind of like once again, kind of mixed with powdered sugar, which is kind of interesting. So there's smoke, powdered sugar. Sweet, just smoky and sweet is the first thing that comes out. And that sweetness turns into kind of like a vanilla, almost caramel, but a very light. If it's caramel, it's very light caramel. But I would say definitely surprisingly vanilla, considering how light this spirit is. It's almost as light as any whiskey I've ever seen. Color-wise, Chardonnay or Pale Straw, those really light colors on the scale. So yeah, you've got the sweet smoke that evolves into vanilla. The smoke sort of comes back and turns into this sort of like even charcoal smoke, like you're cooking, you're heating up a charcoal grill to get ready to cook. There's a fruitiness in there. It's pretty much in line with that pineapple, grapefruit, maybe even pomelo sort of citrus fruit. It's a very bright, acidic kind of fruit. And then the smoke going into the finish sort of builds into this, it's more of like a sooty coal smoke, but we're still not talking like swamp, bogs, asphalt, not that kind of stuff, but not a wood smoke. Yeah. I seem to recall yesterday when I was writing notes for this one, after having tasted it a few times, coming back to the nose, you get a little bit more of a coastal briny nose. And today, for me, that's not quite coming out. But what I'm getting instead is almost a white wine kind of. There's a little bit of a grapiness and minerality. And I'd have to wait a really long time, but yesterday, something that I experienced kind of after I basically walked away from the glass for a minute to do something else, then I sort of smacked my lips, and all of a sudden I got that sort of Isla Band-Aid flavor note, just really faintly but very distinctly, long into the finish. So it kind of lingers around. You don't really realize you're tasting anything, but it's kind of like a sensation. Like it's a little bit oily, it's clinging, it's staying in there. You've got a little bit of that alcohol, not burn necessarily, but that sort of tingle or numbness is kind of staying in your mouth, and that'll stay with you for a little bit because this is, I guess, a relatively oily whiskey, so the finish kind of stays with you. So, now that we've done notes on all of those, I'm going to try to predict what happens when I leave the Scarabus in the barrel that previously held this rye-finished pear brandy. And the easiest way to do that is to take this rye-finished pear brandy that I was just tasting, and I've got maybe half an ounce of that and maybe a quarter ounce of this, so I'm just going to kind of eyeball, put a milliliter to maybe like a milliliter, to go to the half ounce. And this will give me kind of, without the extra time in the barrel, at least an idea of sort of the flavor profile direction that I can expect from the barrel aging. So that small amount, I would say, a milliliter or two that I poured out of there into this one, that clean pear note really comes through. The actual ratio of the pear brandy to the Scarabus is going to be pretty low. It's a wet barrel, sure, but for a 2-liter fill and just the dregs of the brandy that were clinging to the barrel, maybe 10-20 milliliters out of 2 liters, it's going to be a really faint influence. And then there's whatever the barrel itself is hanging on to, so maybe a little bit more, up to maybe 50 milliliters of actual pear brandy. The rest is going to be what that brandy did in the wood, the sort of interaction between the brandy and the wood while it's sitting in there. That's going to come out, and the wood itself is going to change the spirit. So can't necessarily predict how this is going to taste. I hope that pear is there to find, but a little more subdued than what's in my glass right now. But yeah, that pear together with those citrus notes and the sort of acidic fruit notes, the things that were the pineapple and the grapefruit before, that's a nice combination of that clean pear juice, pear brandy, with those acidic fruits. That's a nice combination. The pear brandy sweetened it up, which sort of helps subdue that billowing black smoke a little bit. Now, I love heavy smoke. That's not a problem for me. But in the Scarabus, it's a little unbalanced compared to the rest of the drink. So I think, I would have rated it higher if it had a little bit more going on than just those acidic fruits and the smoke, that sort of coal smoke. I think my audience has fallen asleep. Yep. That was Aaron snoring, so I've muted him. It makes sense, it's pretty late in Europe. Well, that's nice that my voice was able to put somebody to sleep. That's I'll take that as a compliment, not as an insult. Yeah, the pear is very present on the nose, but it's really well integrated into the palate. Sort of accentuates that vanilla that's in the Scarabus. Yeah, the smoke is much more subdued. It's more of an accent. I think the additional fruitiness sort of brightened this up and took away some of the bitterness, but interestingly, that minerality I think plays nicely with the fruits and the smoke. So there's more sweetness. There's also more earthiness, that bitterness. I mean, the minerality sort of adds that bitterness, that earthiness. Yeah, I think that actually did turn out nicely. I think now I'm actually kind of hoping that the pear comes through even stronger once it's aged in the barrel, because I like that pear note that's just barely hiding in there. But in terms of a structural support for the Islay malt, that pear note is it's really giving a lot of structure to the fruitiness. Is not just the acidic side, it's also sort of a sweet side. The smoke is not just smoky, it's also a little bit minerally. So that's kind of best case scenario when you put something into a barrel. Even if you like it, there may be things about it you don't like, and you're hoping that putting that in the barrel, the way the barrel is giving flavor to it, you hope that it sort of accentuates the good, tones down the bad, perhaps. You hope when you give something a finish that you're making it better, not sort of defeating it. My concern with putting a mezcal in after the rye was because those flavors just basically canceled each other out. I wouldn't want 2 liters of a canceled out spirit. That would be, doesn't taste bad, it just doesn't really taste like anything. Maybe a light sweetness or something like that. And that's not really what you're going for. You like something that's unique with a little bit more complexity, sort of hiding the flaws, accentuating the good. Yeah, the finish is still that sort of coal smoke, but it's toned down a bit. and there's a little bit more of that vanilla sweetness, a little bit of that sort of cakey, bready pastry sort of makes its way into the finish. So yeah, obviously in this case, I just took the single malt, I add a little bit of the pear brandy. There's something to be said for just kind of expecting everything that's there. By which I mean grain of salt. I don't know if it's actually going to turn out that way. But just sort of my rough impression of how this might turn out. I think that's going to be interesting. I think adding a little bit of that extra fruitiness to this very smoke-forward malt is going to be a good result. Well, anyway, thanks for listening to me ramble about these things in front of me for 40 minutes. If you stuck with me, I really appreciate it. This is the first time I've done it. Let me know if you liked it, if you'd like to see more things like this. If you'd like it to be shorter. I've never been accused of brevity, so I can always work on that. But if you'd like the length of format, let me know. Thanks for listening.